Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of Near Death Experiences with Illuminated Hearts. Today I have with me Alysa Rushton, who is actually an energy intuitive. So thank you so much for coming on today, Alysa. And would you like to just take a moment to tell everyone about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super stoked to be here. So, I'm an energy intuitive, and I literally just help people raise their vibration and become the divine creators of their best life. And as a near death experience survivor, I get a whole bunch of cool tools and soul vibrational toolkits that I can bring forward to help people do that.
I love that so much. And Alyssa, I just have to tell you that your posts throughout the pandemic have been really helpful to me, just seeing how you explain moving into the fifth dimension and everything has been really inspiring and helpful. And I urge anyone who's watching this to go to Alyssa's page afterwards and check her out because she really knows how to break things down and, help everyone learn about raising their vibration. And I can tell from a firsthand perspective that she is right on with her purpose and everything. So thank you so much for sharing your light. And so tell me about your near death experience. Let me know, tell me what happened.
Yeah, okay. So at the time, I was 30. And interestingly enough, when I was in my 20s, I had had my palm read, and this palm reader said, "You may die at 30 and then you may choose to come back." And I never knew what that meant, but I always thought that I would die before I was turned 30. And so in my 20s, I got incredibly sick. There was a series of events and traumas that I sort of buried really deep within my spirit and I never dealt with. But what started to happen is I started to get really sick and I got a series of autoimmune disorders, MS, rheumatoid arthritis. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and all of these multiple, I had a laundry list of disorders. And through that process of trying to get better, I actually started to get worse. And I wound up with this doctor who was doing a lot of medication. And I had a PICC line going from my left arm into my heart. And that I was on these medications just kind of 24/7 IV therapies, and it was so much for my body that over the course of a couple years I gained 100 pounds. I stopped being able to really communicate very well. I lost the ability to read. I lost the ability to drive. I had to quit my corporate job as a trainer and as a manager there, and I basically watched my life crumble before me. And I was in this hospital chair for hours a day getting infusions, getting sicker and sicker. And I was looking back over my journals the other day, and I knew intuitively that the medication was making me sicker, but it was coming at such a fast pace and more medications were being given and given and given until I just sort of lost control of it really quickly. And so I wound up with an incredible narcotics addiction. I was on end of life pain management plus about 28 different medications for a variety of different things. So as you can imagine, that starts to compound in the body, and the body will develop symptoms, and then they were medicating those symptoms, and it just started to be this snowball effect. And meanwhile, I was married at the time, and my ex-husband kept saying, "Gosh, I don't know if this is really helpful, but I think we should keep doing it, but I feel like you're on way too many drugs and I'm not sure exactly how to proceed." And my physical body, just kept giving me more signs that I wasn't doing the right thing. And I lost control of my bladder. I stopped, I had to start wearing diapers. I had to start using a walker to get around. And I literally looked like I was 90, except I was not even 30 yet. And so I kept having these little mini episodes where I wouldn't be able to breathe, and my husband would try to, shake me into breathing. And it was so many drugs at once that it was just too much on my body. And one night I was also on top of all these drugs, and I was on these fentanyl suckers. Many of you have heard of fentanyl. It's a popular drug today. Fentanyl suckers, fentanyl patch, morphine injections, just all of this super duper hardcore drugs, right? Plus antibiotics, plus, laundry list goes on. So one night I got up in the middle of the night and I had taken something extra that wasn't on my medication schedule, and it was this liquid sleep medication that that basically it's called it's the date rape drug. Like, it's the liquid date rape drug, only it's a legal thing that they actually prescribe.
Wow.
It's the craziest thing. So I took this extra dose not knowing that it was going to kick me over the edge. And that was the night where it kicked me over the edge. And so what happened was I must have gotten up in the middle of the night not feeling well, made my way into the bathroom, and I died on the potty. As I tell people, I died on the potty. By the way, in doing research, it's a very popular place to die, is in the bathroom.
I was gonna say you had an Elvis moment there.
I totally did. I totally did. So my husband must have known something was wrong. Now, he's an atheist and he doesn't believe in the afterlife or any of that. And so, but something woke him up that night, and he came into the bathroom and found me dead on the toilet, lips blue, nails blue, not breathing. And so he starts slapping me, as hard as he can across the face, not out of anything, but just trying to get me to breathe and start to, wake up and revive. And he couldn't really tell how long I had been out. And so he got me finally to the place where I took one breath, and he felt like that was the sign of life he needed to be able to go and call 911. So he called 911, and then, paramedics were called. Now, that's the physical part of what was happening, right? The cool part about what was happening on the other side. Can I tell you about that?
Absolutely.
Oh my God. So while this poor guy's trying to work and bring me back to life, I'm up there zipping around the cosmos. And the first thing that happened to me is, now a lot of people will tell you they see the bright lights and they see all this. None of that happened to me. I bypassed that whole thing because I was on so many drugs that I sort of popped out of that tunnel part, and I just was in the consciousness of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally had the ability to be in multiple places at once. I could stretch and expand my consciousness in every area. I saw galaxies. I saw everything all at once.
Yeah.
And I was able to be a part of it in consciousness. And so for me, it was a really physical experience, in the sense that there was motion and movement and direction, and I could be in multiple places all at once with my consciousness. But I didn't have a physical body per se, but the best way I can describe it is it felt like being physical without a body, that felt amazing and blissful and like you could stretch in any direction, only I realized later it was consciousness. So I spent some time up there exploring the galaxy. I spent some time, just like looking at all the different things I could look at all at once. It was amazing how much consciousness I could hold all at once.
Yeah.
And then what started to happen was I then kind of got pulled out of this. And here's what I suspect. I suspect it happened when I got slapped. And I got pulled out of that cosmic God divine consciousness and into this, the best way I can describe it is an olive drab world. It looked just like our world, and I knew people there. I couldn't interact with them in any way, but I could feel good there. Do you know what I mean? Like, I felt good. And I initially went to go and hang around people that I knew that had addictions, and I just felt good. And I knew I couldn't talk to them, but I was like, oh, this person makes me feel happy. And I knew that this was a very healing place for me. But the sky was this olive color, and everything had sort of this olivey tinge. And I didn't find out until 5 years later, after my near-death experience, what this actually was. And this is the etheric layer where people that die of sudden deaths and addiction and stuff like that, they go there it's a very healing place to kind of get bolstered up and healed. And so I'm in this place that I knew I could stay here for a while and get sort of fully rejuvenated, but I wasn't going to be able to come back as me, as Alyssa in this body.
Wow.
So it wasn't like someone came down and said, "Do you want to stay here?" It was none of that. It was more, it was more that internal knowing of, okay, I can stay here and I love this. This is really yummy. I'm going to go visit this one last person before I go, or, I need to leave now. Right. And so I just chose to leave then. And then I came back and slammed. Oh, the force of slamming back in your body was crazy. It was super heavy. I felt completely like, that feeling. And then of course, I'm there, I'm naked in the bathroom. Okay, you got to remember I'm 240 pounds. There's 6 EMTs in the room. It looked like 20 because my eyes were swirling, and they're asking me all sorts of questions like, what's your address and what's your date of birth? None of which I know the answer to. And they finally said, "What's your name?" And I was like, yeah, that feels like one I should know. And I got really nervous that I didn't know it, and you could feel the temperature in the room just drop. And people were like, "Uh-oh." And I looked at my husband, who was kneeling right beside me, and I said, I'm slurring, and I say, "Honey, what's my name?" He goes, "It's Alyssa, baby." And so I look back up at the EMTs and I say, "It's Alyssa, baby." And so that was a good sign for them. They were very pleased with that. And then afterwards, I wasn't done. They loaded me into the gurney. They realized that I had had too many narcotics after talking with my ex-husband. And so they pumped me full of a substance called Narcan, which blocks all of your drug receptors at once. And so one dose should be enough. But for me, I had so much in my system that they had to call the hospital and get clearance for a second dose because it was not enough for me, and a second dose can kill you. So there I am in the ambulance, and that second experience of like leaving my body, going, "Hey," I literally grabbed over to the EMT and I said, "I'm dying." He's like, "No, you're not." And I'm like, "Yes, I am." He's like, "No, stay with me." And I'm like, "I'm gonna go."
You're like, but it's fun there anyway.
Right? It's so fun. So yeah, so then again, pulling back up into consciousness, but then getting slammed back into my body. And this time it felt even harder. And it felt like just elephants sitting on my chest. And if I was flailing, and I woke up in the hospital now, legs are flailing. And you have to remember, I hadn't moved around much. I was using a walker to scooch around, like a 90-year-old. And so now my legs are flailing and my arms are flailing, and I'm doing all these crazy acrobatics in the bed strapped down. So yeah, so that was my awakening near-death experience. And in the hospital, I had this moment where I realized, okay, what I'm doing is not cutting the mustard. I have to do something different. I didn't know how, but I knew that I had to. And then, the very next day, I went back to treatments as usual, as normal, and knowing that I needed to do something different. But there was this mantra playing in my head. And this mantra I knew wasn't my own. I didn't know where it came from. And the mantra was, "I'm getting better and better every day in every way." And it would just play over and over again, not even in my voice. "I'm getting better and better every day in every way." It was kind of a man's voice. If I had to say it was somebody who sounded sort of like Wayne Dyer, but it would just play in my head. And that started my trajectory of healing.
Wow. And so how long did it take you to get off the meds that you're on?
Great question. So you can imagine 28 medications, many of them end-of-life medications that are given for comfort care. It took me about 5 years to get off everything, maybe a little under, but at that point, I sort of didn't trust doctors anymore. And I didn't trust them to be able to manage it for me because I had sort of given up my responsibility and my power and just said, "Yeah, I need more, give me more medication, just whatever you can give me, I'll take." And I realized, okay, I'm giving up too much of my power, I'm giving up too much of my responsibility, so I need to take that back. I need to do this myself. And so I had the decision at one point to go into rehab. My husband and I were talking, should I go to rehab or should I try to do this on my own? And this is not for everybody. I think I actually chose a harder path, but I chose to do it on my own, and I did it through a lot of hard work, meditation, really cleaned up my eating, just every little facet of myself I had to rework and rewire, which I think is why it took so long. I think if I had gone to some sort of 30-day rehab, I don't know that I would have been able to rework the entirety of my life that needed to be reworked in order for me to be what I am today, if that makes any sense.
That absolutely makes sense. It does make you think about like when someone checks into rehab, like, yes, you're being detoxed by the drugs, but there's so many emotional components that go underlie why a person is on the drugs in the first place. That if you don't address that, you're going to just end up back in the same spot.
Yeah, a massive goose chills. That's the thing is, with kids, especially looking at why are they doing the drugs? Why are they doing the bad behaviors? It's usually always because of a safety issue. They don't feel safe in the world. And then they have accompanying anxiety, depression, or emotions that they don't know how to handle. And so, just from my own journey, I can understand it was a lot of traumatic events where I didn't feel safe in the world. And so it was easier for me to manifest. And I say manifest, what I mean to say is it's easier for the body to express pain than it is emotional pain. Physical pain is so much easier for the body. So it was easier for me to express the pain through this physical pain stuff and then medicate it. But ultimately, I had to, like you said so beautifully, go back and deal with the emotional stuff.
Yeah. So are you still dealing with those different diagnoses that you had before everything went down? You don't have them anymore.
No,
So you healed them all.
exactly. So, and by the way, that's a process, right? It's a process for me. Can I share what I did?
Yeah.
So for me, what I did, number one, I did the deep healing work of dealing with the emotions, forgiveness work, forgiving, some really traumatic events that I had in my life, forgiving myself for going against my intuition, for forgiving others, right? For overriding those parts of me that knew not to be in a certain place at a certain time. All of that stuff, right? For parts of me that knew not to take that job when I did, anyways. So, all of that, I had to go in and do the healing, but I also had to do a huge cleanup around my actual physical body's nutrition. That was huge for me. And once I was able to do that, I went gluten free, dairy free, egg free. I drink an extraordinary amount of green juice. I eat really high vibrational foods, all organic. I eat a little meat sometimes when I feel like I need it, and sometimes I don't. I don't identify with any one sort of eating style except super high nutrient food, super high vibrational food, because I do believe that our body is the vehicle, right? It's the vehicle for our divine selves. And so now I just try to treat my body like the experience that I had up there. I try to just treat it like, well, what would the divine want for me to do, you know?
And you're absolutely glowing, so it's working.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you, so before your experience, number one, did they give you like a timeline of like how much longer you had to live? Like, were you kind of like counting down the days and being like, oh, I'm gonna die soon? Like, was that how was it going with like your trajectory of life, you know?
That's a great question. So, because I didn't have cancer or one of those types of diseases, it was I had a list of chronic illnesses. So, it was sort of like, well, we don't really know how long you have. All we know is you're really going downhill swiftly. And there was talk in my family about putting me into a home, like a facility to be cared for because I was getting so bad, right? I was my bladder control was terrible. I had to wear diapers. Was getting back into life with Depends, you know? And so, yeah, I didn't have necessarily this impending death, but it wasn't something that was off the table either. And ultimately, for me, it was a drug overdose that took me out.
Hmm. Were you worried that you were gonna die?
I was worried that I wasn't going to die.
Hmm.
truth be told. I was in so much pain. I really didn't want to be on the planet. I was really kind of fed up with my body. I was pissed at my body. I was mad that I couldn't, go and do the things that I wanted to do. You got to remember, I was still in my 30s.
Yeah.
I hadn't even turned 30 yet.
Yeah.
And so I was mad. I was mad at myself. But I really didn't want to be on the planet. And I think that this is something that's really common for more people than is talked about, is that, being on planet Earth isn't necessarily the easiest thing. And we're not taught at all how to deal with emotions or anxiety or depression, a lot of the stuff that a lot of people have. And so I was never taught how to do that. And I just felt, I don't know, I just felt like I didn't want to be here, I guess, to answer your question.
Yeah. And so, had you thought about what death would be like before that experience? Like, did you believe in the afterlife, or like what were you thinking about it? And then how did you feel afterwards?
Well, what's funny is I grew up Christian, so that was my faith that I grew up. And when I was 12, I got to go on a trip over to Thailand. And when I was in Thailand, I learned about Buddhists. And when I learned about Buddhists, I kind of scratched my head, and we were there on a church trip, and I asked my pastor, I said, "Well, what happens to the Buddhists?" And he said, "Well, the Buddhists go to hell." And I said, "What? No, that can't be true." He's like, "Oh yeah, anybody who doesn't believe in Jesus goes to hell." And so I had this in my mind. I had this idea of what heaven was and what hell was when I was 12. But then also when I was 12, I kind of thought, you know what? I don't know that that makes all that much sense to me, realistically. So I had sort of concocted in my mind something very much different. I've also heard, because of the number of near-death survivors I've talked to since being one, that whatever it is you believe, that's sort of the first thing you get to see, and it makes it feel very comfortable for you.
Mm-hmm. But you were seeing like the cosmos and stuff. So, did you ever have any idea that that might be something that you would be seeing when you pass away? That was what you thought?
I did, because I didn't really have any relatives that I wanted to greet me at the pearly gates, and I didn't believe in the pearly gates anyway. So I was like, no, I think it's more of a cosmosian engagement. I didn't know how that would look, but I felt like it was more cosmic and more expansive. So I got to experience, but I didn't have a visualization of what it would be, I guess would be my difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And did you like see any beings, or you were just seeing lots of stars and galaxies?
Great question. So I saw everything. So let me try to explain it, because I always struggle here.
Yeah, like how do you put everything into words?
It's difficult. So if you can imagine, have you ever seen a bug's eye and how it has those millions of little eyeballs in it?
Yeah.
So what I experienced was seeing each pinpointed ray of light. So it was like I was God consciousness or divine consciousness. And it was like I got a picture of each individualized experience. Make sense so
Mm-hmm.
far? So I could move into like your experience, or this person's experience, or this dog's experience, or this galaxy's experience. I could move into individualized experiences and sort of feel the feelings and see the sights of that experience, but I could do it at like a million times all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it was a lot of consciousness, and if there was something I really was loving, I could zoom into it and really kind of like, it was weird. I can't explain it other than zooming in and kind of pulling open the picture and feeling it and seeing it and experiencing it even more. But it's like all of the data was coming in all at once,
Like,
and I
yeah,
could
like,
feel it.
wow. So, do you have one example that you can think of that was like one experience that you zoomed in on that you can't remember specifically? That
No,
you,
because it was so much all at once. What I can tell you is I came back and I knew quantum physics from a math perspective, right?
Mhm.
And as I was coming back in the first time, I was like, "Oh, remember this, remember this, remember this,"
Yeah.
And then I tried the next day, even sitting in the hospital chair, to incorporate the math, and I completely lost it. So I guess that's the one of the best ideas of like knowing and seeing how the math of the universe worked is one thing I saw, right? And I was trying so hard to bring it down, but I think there's only so much the human brain without the training can hold when you're, when you come back into your human consciousness. It's not, your human brain isn't really meant to hold that much all at once.
So, like, how did you see the math of quantum physics? Or, was it like you saw the numbers and you had all the codes, or like, what did it look like?
Yeah, so symbols, numbers, codes, but it's also like the question you're asking is like, how do you see the world outside? Do you know what I mean? Well, you just see it.
Yeah.
You see what you see. So I could see the math, but I could see how the math worked and functioned. I understood from that perspective, like how the math worked and functioned. I could understand like how to put a galaxy together if I needed to from a mathematical perspective. Like it was a lot of data. Imagine just huge blocks of data that you didn't have a brain getting in the way of. It was, your consciousness was just blown open. So
Wow.
this is the other thing I think that happened for me, and I feel very fortunate. And I think everybody comes into this life with gifts, skills, and talents that aren't necessarily like golfing, right? Or being a good runner. It's more like intuition and energy work and sound healing and all these amazing skills and talents, right? So I personally think that those things get turned off as a kid. You have them coming in, but through programming of parents and your surroundings, that they get turned off. So when I had this reboot, I call it my personal full reboot,
Hmm.
those latent skills and talents for me got turned back on.
Hmm.
So it took me a while to incorporate them back into my life and to understand how to utilize and work with the energy, and how to understand and read the information that I was seeing out in the world. Like I didn't understand, when I look at a picture now, I'm getting a bunch more information that I used to get, and I can actually see what that person's eating, if they're sick, if they're doing drugs, if they're, like I can see all that stuff where I didn't understand at first when I would look at that picture how how that information was getting in. So I would discount it, but then after enough experience of understanding, yes, the information I'm getting is quite accurate, right? Then I could incorporate that. But I think this is the thing, and this is what I try to teach in my course, Reality by Divine Design, is that you can activate those things without the near-death experience. I highly recommend that you don't have one, right? I
Yeah.
don't actually recommend having
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, yeah, right.
The hard.
So, okay. So tell me a little bit more about how that process of like getting and that was a question that I did want to ask you, is like, I know sometimes in near death experiences, people will act like, typical human with not really like paying attention to their intuition, maybe a little bit or things like that. I hear you said that you went to a palm reader, so maybe you had a little interest, but how did you become intuitive, an energy intuitive after your near death experience when you weren't using that before?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always, because of who my mom is, I always had a little bit of an inkling of wanting to dabble in that world, but I never understood how or why. So for me, it just happened as sort of a natural progression, that because um, I wish I had a better analogy, but when you get a new car and it drives really fast, and maybe the steering's a little different, like the steering's a little tighter. Well, you just have to learn how to utilize that steering, and you have to learn how to. It's like my dear friend got a BMW Sport, and she's still learning, right, how to drive it well,
Mhm.
because the steering's different. So I guess what I would say is, by the nature of having those skills turned fully on, and then I had to figure out how to go and work with them.
Mhm.
So what I teach now is for people how to turn the skills on, how to remove the filters, how to access that level of connection so that they can be their own best energy readers, so that they can be their own best, intuitive guides, and get the information, and be good readers for their friends and family, and so that they can really ultimately, what I learned about the world is that it's a lot more malleable. than we think. It's a lot, we can work with the energy more than we actually understand we can. And so that's ultimately what, since I was able to see that on the other side, I can teach that now in a practical, grounded way that doesn't sound, crazy. It's just like, here's the practical steps that you've got to do in order to do that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So do you think that, and I don't know if when you were out in the cosmos, you got any of this information about like, and I don't know if you believe in having a soul contract and karma and things that might impact your time on Earth, but do you think that you signed up for this near death experience to happen?
This is a great. Oh, I love this question. We could talk for hours about this one question. So, yes, I do believe in karma. I believe in instant karma right now. I do believe that we have certain things that we have to clean up. I also believe in infinite timelines. So, let me give you an example. I believe that there was an aspect of me that could have learned these lessons and could have chosen to not have her skills and talents and all that stuff activated in a near death capacity. So it's kind of like this. If we're going to Cincinnati and we're driving from Utah to Cincinnati, there's multiple ways to get there, but we're still going to go to Cincinnati. We can decide along the way if we want to take the long route. I personally think that what happens is that the universe will give you signs and signals and clues so that you don't have to take the hard way. You don't have to take I sort of feel that this is older energy to have to learn through tragedy and suffering and all that. I don't think that's necessary. I think for some people, they choose that, maybe unconsciously, maybe consciously, maybe it's because they don't understand how they can work with the timelines. So when I was up in the universe, what I saw is that we're running multiple lives all at once. It feels like it's separated by time, but it's really not. So, and we have infinite potentials. So you always have the ability, and I've worked with a lot of people who've had deadly diseases, right? So if you have a deadly disease like a cancer, you have the infinite potential to say, no, actually, I'm choosing not to pass away from this right now. I'm actually going to choose something different for myself. Now, if it's your time and it's your time, I don't know that you can override that, but most people have in their soul plan several different opt out points, right? That they then can choose to work with. So at any given moment in time, I could have chosen, I believe, to not come back. I could have chosen to do what I did. I could have chosen to not die in the potty. Because we have infinite timelines, we have infinite potential. That's just my belief. I do, though, believe that it takes work. That's the biggest work for people, is to recognize that they may not be on a great trajectory and to say, I'm going to stop the momentum of this trajectory and go this way, go someplace different with it.
I 100% agree with you. And it's actually something that I personally, to do a quick little personal share, is
Yeah.
I've been working on that. And in about 2013, 2014-ish, I started getting migraines. And I started getting migraines up until 2020, because around the last like 3 years or so, I really started trying to heal certain things and change my trajectory. And one big thing was, well, I don't want to define myself as a migraine sufferer anymore. And I felt like that was a contract that I had probably signed before I came down here. And I said, you know what? I'm rewriting this contract. And in 2020, I figured out that it was birth control that was causing my migraines. And I got off and I haven't had a migraine since. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think part of it was the intention of, I don't need, exactly what you said about like, I don't need to experience this to learn that lesson. There's another way. There has to be another way. And kind of figuring out how to transition that pain and make it easier on your physical body to experience whatever lesson you need to experience.
Amen, sister. And that is the thing, is that we have so much choice in what we experience, and so much choice of, do we want to learn through fear and suffering and tragedy, or do we really want to do something different and learn through joy and fun and yumminess and sensuality? And we really can choose that. And like you said, it's a choice of getting out of the I am a migraine sufferer. And this is one of the things that I learned that was probably the single biggest thing, is that I am is the name of the divine. It's the name of consciousness. So anything that you I am in front of, you are claiming at an identity level, and your physical expression literally has to express that out.
Mm-hmm.
And once you change that identity, right, everything will change.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow, this has been really incredible. I am so inspired by your story, and I'm so inspired by the work that you do. Is there anything else that you would want to let the world know about how your near-death experience impacted you?
Well, yes, I would say that you don't have to die to forget who you are so that you can be something different. But in order to be something different, you really do have to let go of the known. You have to let go of who it is you think you are. And only when you do that, only when you let go of the known, so that you can create something new, so that you can I am something new in your life, then everything can change. And this is a very uncomfortable spot for people, right? It's super uncomfortable to let go of all our baggage and our traumas and our tragedies and all of these things that we think define us. But once you allow yourself to process through that, right? I'm not saying spiritually bypass or anything else, but no, you process through that, you heal the parts of you, you feel the emotional feelings in your body, and then you release that identity, no longer needing those things that kept you locked in trauma and that pain cycle again and again and again. Then you can start to create something new, and creating that I am a divine expression of God. And if everybody walked around going, I'm a divine expression of God, or I'm a divine expression. Maybe you don't believe in God. Maybe you believe in something else. But if everybody tomorrow got up and said, I'm a divine expression of light, how would they be operating differently in their day? How would they be greeting their neighbors and their people at the Starbucks drive-through, right? How would they be driving in traffic as a divine being of light?
Mm-hmm.
And when you embody that I amness, I am that divine expression of love, your whole life will change. And that's what I transitioned into. I will also tell you, it's not an overnight job, but it is something that's worth doing.
It sure is. How beautifully said. I love that so much. You're so right and so on point. And um, I, like I said, I'm speechless at this point. Like, you are so awesome. And I'm just so impressed by how what I see is a totally transformed person who now is so confident in who you are, like that you just radiate love, light, intelligence, inspiration. It is so apparent that like you just are totally on path. Like, you know what I mean? And I love how you're saying like you don't need to die to get yourself on the path, or you don't need
No.
to have the hard things to get yourself on the path. Like, of course, it got you there faster, but now you can teach everyone else how to do it and show them that, like, hey, just like look at the signs, and you don't have to necessarily be me, even though we all might be a little bit jealous that we didn't get to see the cosmos from the same viewpoint. But one day we will.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, it's like doing something today to just embody more love, doing something today to embody more light, to embody more nutrition in your body, to embody more kindness and forgiveness towards everybody, even if they've wronged you. You know, ultimately, it's about embodiment. And like you said, people can see it, they can feel it, it's palpable. And that's the work right now.
That's so right. I love your articulation. It's beautiful.
Thank
So,
you.
well, Alyssa, would you like to tell everyone that's listening where they can find more information about you if they're interested?
Yeah, so hang out with me, you guys, on Instagram. It's Alyssa, Alysa Rushton, Rushton, and hang out with me there. And there's lots of inspiration and cool free tools for you. And yeah, come hang out.
Okay, awesome. And if anyone wants to check out my page, I am at illuminated_hearts underscore on Instagram and illuminated-hearts.com. So thank you for tuning in today.